Admiral Ta-One's hands gripped the railing of the command bridge until his knuckles turned white. The massive view screen before him displayed the unfolding nightmare, another defensive line shattering like glass against the endless tide of the void swarm. The creatures moved like a living shadow across space, devouring everything in their path. The flagship's bridge hummed with tension as status reports flooded in from the failing defensive positions. Officers worked frantically at their stations, their faces illuminated by the red emergency lights that had become all too familiar in recent months. The air tasted stale, recycled too many times as life support systems struggled under the strain of constant combat readiness. "Sir, the 7th Fleet reports total losses in the Centauri sector," one of the communications officers called out, her voice trembling. "No survivors detected." Commander Jia approached the Admiral, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of worry. She held up a holographic display showing the latest battle statistics. The numbers painted a grim picture, one that had become increasingly common over the past year. 3 more systems lost in the past cycle. "Admiral," she reported, her voice steady despite the devastating news. "The adaptation rate of the Void Swarm is increasing beyond our worst projections. Our weapons, they're becoming less effective with each engagement. The enemy seems to learn and evolve after every battle." Ta-One studied the tactical display, watching as red indicators representing coalition territories winked out one by one. The mighty coalition, once spanning thousands of systems and hundreds of species, was now reduced to barely 100 worlds. Their greatest technologies, developed over millennia, proved useless against an enemy that could adapt to any weapon within days. "Show me the casualty reports from the Proxima defense," he ordered, though he dreaded seeing the numbers. Jaya's fingers danced across her datapad. The holographic display shifted, showing rows upon rows of ships lost, crews killed, and civilians who couldn't be evacuated in time. Each number represented countless lives snuffed out by the relentless advance of the Void Swarm. "The civilian evacuation ships?" Ta-One asked, though he already knew the answer from Jaya's expression. "Only 3 out of 20 made it through the blockade, sir. The rest." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what happened to ships caught by the Void Swarm. Complete molecular disassembly, the very atoms of ships and crew broken down and absorbed into the ever-growing swarm. The massive view screen showed the haunting images of once thriving worlds reduced to lifeless husks. Where great cities once stood, only gray wastelands remained. Oceans had been drained, atmospheres stripped away. The Void Swarm left nothing behind but dead rocks floating in space. "We can't keep fighting like this," Ta-One said quietly, more to himself than to his commander. "Every defeat makes them stronger. Every victory costs us more than we can afford to lose." The bridge crew worked in grim silence, broken only by the beeping of consoles and the occasional quiet report. They all knew the truth. They were fighting a losing battle against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Suddenly, Lieutenant Harin burst onto the bridge, her boots skidding on the polished floor as she rushed toward the Admiral. Her crystalline datapad clutched tightly in her hands glowed with urgent notifications. The young officer's eyes were wide with excitement, an emotion that had become rare on coalition ships. "Admiral," she called out, drawing everyone's attention. "We've detected an anomalous signal from Sector 471. It's different from anything we've encountered before." Ta-One turned to face her, noting the trembling in her hands and the flush in her cheeks. "Explain, Lieutenant. What kind of signal?" It's not like anything in our databases, sir. The pattern suggests artificial origin, but it's not using any known communication protocols. And sir," she paused, double-checking her readings, "it's coming from a sector we thought was empty. No registered colonies, no known spacefaring civilizations." Commander Jaya moved to examine the lieutenant's datapad, her eyebrows rising as she studied the readings. "These energy signatures, they're primitive compared to our technology, but there's something about the pattern." "What is it, Commander?" Ta-One asked, noting the change in her expression. The signal. It's chaotic, almost random in ways. The Void Swarm has always struggled most with unpredictable elements. That's why they take so long to adapt to our more experimental weapons. She looked up at the Admiral, a spark of hope in her eyes. Sir, whatever is generating this signal might be immune to the swarm's adaptation capabilities. Ta-One studied the tactical display, noting the position of Sector 471 relative to their current defensive lines. It was risky. Sending ships to investigate would weaken their already stretched defenses, but they were running out of options and time. Prepare a scout ship, he ordered after a moment's consideration. Small crew, minimal profile. We need to know what's out there. He turned to face the view screen, watching as another distant star system flickered and died under the Void Swarm's assault. Whatever this signal is, whatever civilization might be out there, we need to find it before the swarm does. The bridge crew moved with renewed purpose, hope providing energy that mere stimulants couldn't match. For the first time in months, they had something to work toward besides mere survival. In the depths of space, unknown to the Coalition fleet, a small blue planet continued broadcasting its signals into the void, its inhabitants unaware that they had just become the last hope for a dying galaxy. The scout ship Stellar Wind emerged from hyperspace in a flash of blue light, its advanced engines humming as they powered down from faster-than-light travel. The sleek vessel hung silently at the edge of Sector 471, its sensors immediately beginning to scan the surrounding space. Captain Sunmai stood at the main observation window, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing sensor data. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The third planet orbiting an ordinary yellow star was alive with electromagnetic signals and artificial light patterns. Navigator Du Hyun, she called out, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. Verify these readings. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Du Hyun's fingers flew across his control panel, running diagnostic after diagnostic. This can't be right, he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. How did we miss this? The sector was scanned centuries ago. There shouldn't be. He trailed off as another set of readings confirmed what they were seeing. The planet below them was teeming with life and technology. Artificial satellites orbited the blue-green world, cities sprawled across continents, and countless electronic signals bounced through its atmosphere. It wasn't advanced by Coalition standards. No energy shields, no faster-than-light travel, no gravity manipulation, but it was undeniably a civilization on the brink of reaching for the stars. Captain, the ship's science officer called out, I'm detecting nuclear technology, primitive space stations, and they appear to have vehicles on another planet in their system, crewed rovers on their red neighbor. Sun Mai ordered the ship to maintain its position at the system's edge. Coalition first contact protocols were clear. Observation first. Contact only if absolutely necessary. But with the Void Swarm consuming worlds across the galaxy, they didn't have the luxury of time. Begin detailed scans of their military capabilities, she ordered, and prepare a first contact package. We need to know if they can help us. Hours passed as the Stellar Wind's crew gathered data. The more they learned about the humans, as the species called themselves, the more fascinating they became. These creatures had gone from primitive flight to landing on their moon in less than 70 years. They had survived multiple near-extinction events, global wars, and environmental disasters, yet kept pushing forward. When the time came for first contact, the Coalition ship descended through Earth's atmosphere under the cover of darkness. They had chosen a secure military facility in a region called Nevada for their initial meeting. Diplomatic liaison Jinwoo had prepared for hours, studying human customs and protocols, but nothing could have truly prepared him for the reality of meeting these beings face to face. The humans who greeted them were a mix of military personnel and government officials. Jinwoo noticed immediately how they maintained their composure despite facing alien life for the first time. There was fear in their eyes, yes, but also curiosity and determination. Welcome to Earth, one of their leaders said, stepping forward. "We've been wondering when someone would finally answer our signals." Jinwoo struggled to maintain his diplomatic composure. These humans were fascinating. They had already theorized the existence of alien life and had been actively trying to contact it. Despite their primitive technology, they showed no sign of being overwhelmed by the Coalition's advanced capabilities. The meeting lasted hours. The humans asked intelligent questions about Coalition technology, society, and the state of the galaxy. When Jinwoo explained about the Void Swarm, he expected panic. Instead, the humans immediately began discussing defensive strategies and possible weaknesses to exploit. "You're saying these things adapt to any weapon used against them?" a human military officer asked. "What about multiple weapons at once? Different types? Have you tried changing tactics randomly?" The questions continued, each one showing a different way of thinking about the problem. The humans didn't see an unstoppable force. They saw a puzzle to be solved, an enemy to be defeated. Captain Sunmei, observing the proceedings, sent an urgent message to Coalition Command. "First contact successful. Species shows remarkable potential, requesting immediate diplomatic delegation and military advisors. These humans might be exactly what we need." As the meeting concluded, Jinwoo found himself reflecting on the strange paradox of humanity. They were simultaneously primitive and ingenious, peaceful and warlike, cautious and bold. Their technology was centuries behind the Coalition's, but their minds seemed to work in ways that might be the key to defeating the Void Swarm. The stellar wind departed Earth with a promise to return soon with more Coalition representatives. As they accelerated out of the solar system, Captain Sunmi gathered her crew for a final observation of the blue planet growing smaller behind them. "To think," she said quietly, "we almost missed them entirely. A primitive species on an unremarkable planet in an overlooked sector." She turned to face her crew. "And they might just be the galaxy's last hope." Do-hyun, still at his navigation station, nodded in agreement. "The Void Swarm has never encountered anything like them. Their unpredictability, their way of thinking, it's completely different from any species in the Coalition." The scout ship entered hyperspace, carrying news that would change the course of the war. Behind them, Earth continued its orbit around its yellow star, its inhabitants unaware that they had just become part of a struggle for the survival of all intelligent life in the galaxy. Colonel Yu-jin stood at the edge of the training ground, her mouth slightly open, as she watched the human soldiers in action. The Coalition's most advanced combat simulation was running, projecting holographic enemies that adapted and evolved with each engagement. No Coalition species had ever lasted more than 10 minutes against the program's highest difficulty setting. The humans had been fighting for nearly an hour. "Watch this," Security Chief Minho said beside her, pointing to a group of human soldiers who had split from their main force. While the primary team engaged the simulated enemies head-on, this smaller group was crawling through the mud, taking a route no Coalition tactical computer would have considered viable. "They're insane," Minho muttered, shaking his head as the flanking team emerged behind the enemy position. "But it works. It shouldn't work, but it does." The simulation erupted in chaos as the humans attacked from multiple directions at once. Their movements seemed random, almost disorganized to Coalition-trained eyes, but Yu-jin could see the underlying strategy. They were deliberately being unpredictable, changing tactics mid-fight, using the terrain in ways the simulation hadn't been programmed to expect. General Davidson stood nearby, his uniform still pristine despite the dusty environment. The human commander had quickly earned respect among Coalition officers for his unconventional thinking. Now, watching his troops demolish a supposedly unbeatable combat simulation, Yu-jin understood why. "Your soldiers move like water," she commented to Davidson, "flowing around obstacles instead of trying to break through them." Davidson smiled. "That's an interesting way to put it. We've learned through centuries of warfare that the strongest position can fall to an unexpected approach. Your simulation is impressive, but it thinks like a machine. Humans think like, well, humans. As if to prove his point, one of the human squads had discovered that the simulation's protective barriers could be slid under if someone dug quickly enough. It wasn't an intended feature of the training ground. It was an exploit that no coalition species had ever thought to try. "Stop the simulation," Jin ordered. The holographic enemies faded away, leaving sweaty but triumphant human soldiers catching their breath on the field. "General Davidson, I need to understand how you train your people to think this way." Davidson walked with her to where his troops were gathering. "It's not training, exactly. It's human nature. We've survived on Earth by adapting, by finding new solutions when the old ones fail. Every human child learns to think creatively just to get through daily life." One of the human soldiers was already sketching modifications for coalition energy weapons in the dirt, suggesting ways to make them more effective against fast-moving targets. Another group was discussing how to combine coalition shield technology with human stealth tactics. "Look at them," Minho said quietly. "They've been exposed to our technology for less than a month, and they're already finding ways to improve it that we never considered." A demonstration of the modified weapons proved dramatically successful. The humans had sacrificed some of the energy efficiency that coalition engineers prized in favor of raw effectiveness. The results were messier, less elegant, but undeniably more lethal. "This is exactly what we need against the Void Swarm," Jin realized. "They adapt to patterns, to predictable attacks. But humans..." She watched as the soldiers started another round of training, this time incorporating their modified weapons and new tactics. "Humans don't follow patterns the way other species do." General Davidson was already working on larger strategies, combining coalition fleet movements with human-style tactical flexibility. His plans broke every rule of conventional space combat, but the simulation showed them working with devastating effectiveness. "The key," Davidson explained over dinner that evening, "is to never do the same thing twice. The moment we become predictable, we lose our advantage. That's why we're having each unit develop its own tactics, its own modifications to the equipment. The Void Swarm won't be able to adapt because there won't be a single pattern to adapt to." Jin watched the human commander as he spoke, noting the intensity in his eyes. These humans didn't just fight. They threw themselves completely into whatever challenge they faced. They didn't accept limitations or impossible odds. They simply found ways around them. As the day ended, Jin sent her report to Coalition High Command. "Human integration proceeding beyond expectations. Request immediate approval for full technological sharing and joint military operations. These humans aren't just allies. They're the weapon we've been searching for." The training ground fell quiet as night fell, but lights still burned in the planning rooms where human and coalition officers worked together, combining their strengths in ways neither side had imagined possible. In orbit, human engineers were already helping to modify coalition warships, making them more effective against the Void Swarm. For the first time since the war began, there was real hope. The Void Swarm had never encountered a species like humanity, and that might just be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. The battle alarms blared through the Coalition fleet as the Void Swarm emerged from hyperspace near Proxima Centauri. This time, however, something was different. Among the sleek Coalition vessels, retrofitted human ships took their positions, their designs a strange hybrid of Earth technology, enhanced with Coalition systems. "All ships, battle positions." Admiral Ta One's voice echoed across the command channel. "Human squadrons, you have tactical freedom. Fight as you see fit." The Void Swarm approached in its usual perfect formation, a living wall of darkness that had devoured countless worlds. Their black ships moved with mechanical precision, each one part of a greater whole. They had never lost a major engagement, until today. The human ships broke formation immediately, scattering in seemingly random directions. Coalition commanders watched in amazement as Earth vessels performed maneuvers that defied conventional tactical logic. They flew paths that no combat computer would recommend, attacked from angles that shouldn't have been possible. "Look at them go," A coalition officer whispered, watching as human pilots barrel-rolled their ships through gaps in the Void Swarm's defenses. The swarm's usual adaptation patterns faltered, unable to predict where the humans would strike next. Science Officer Hayan stood at her station aboard the flagship, her eyes fixed on the neural pattern readings flowing across her screen. She had been studying both human and Void Swarm brain patterns for weeks, and now everything was falling into place. "Admiral," she called out, her voice excited. "I understand now. The humans, their neural patterns are completely alien to the Void Swarm's adaptive algorithms. The swarm can't predict what it can't understand." On the main view screen, a human squadron led by Captain Sarah Chen executed an impossible turn, their ship spinning end over end while still firing. The maneuver would have made any coalition pilot black out, but the humans had specifically trained for it. The Void Swarm's formation broke apart trying to counter the unpredictable attack. "They think like nothing else in the galaxy," Hayan continued, sending her findings to the Admiral's display. "Where coalition species seek patterns and logical solutions, humans embrace chaos. They make intuitive leaps that our most advanced AI can't follow." The battle raged on. But for the first time, the Void Swarm was losing. Human ships darted through their formations like angry wasps, striking from impossible angles, never following the same pattern twice. Coalition vessels provided supporting fire, their coordinated attacks complementing the humans' chaotic style. "They're retreating." The cry went up across the command channel as the Void Swarm began to pull back. The perfect formation was in shambles, their usual adaptation protocols failing in the face of human unpredictability. Captain Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Not letting them get away that easy. All human squadrons, execute Operation Thunderbolt." The human ships suddenly accelerated to dangerous speeds, their coalition-enhanced engines pushing far beyond safety limits. They charged straight into the retreating Void Swarm, weapons blazing. It was suicide by any logical standard. Exactly why it worked. The Void Swarm, programmed to counter rational tactics, couldn't adapt fast enough. Human ships tore through their ranks, causing massive damage before breaking away in yet another series of unpredictable patterns. Science Officer Hayan's hands flew across her console, recording everything. "Every human pilot is flying differently," she noted. "Every ship has its own modified weapons, its own tactical approach. The swarm can't adapt because there's no single pattern to adapt to." The battle ended in a decisive victory. For the first time in recorded history, a Void Swarm fleet had been not just defeated but routed. The cost was high. Several human ships were lost, their crews having pushed their vessels beyond all safe limits, but the impact was undeniable. Admiral Ta-1 called a meeting immediately after the battle. Coalition commanders gathered around the tactical display, watching recordings of the engagement while Han explained her findings. "Humans don't just think differently," she concluded. "They embrace uncertainty in a way no other species does. They take risks our tactical computers would never approve. They see possibilities where our logic says none exist." The implications were enormous. The Void Swarm had evolved to counter logical, pattern-based warfare, but humans fought with intuition, emotion, and what they called gut feelings. Concepts the swarm couldn't process. As the coalition fleet regrouped and began repairs, messages of hope spread across the galaxy. The invincible enemy had finally been defeated. The Void Swarm could be beaten, not by superior technology or overwhelming force, but by the beautiful unpredictability of the human mind. In the medical bay, injured human pilots were already discussing new tactics, planning even more daring maneuvers for the next battle. Their excitement was contagious, spreading through the coalition crews like wildfire. For the first time since the war began, victory seemed possible. Science Officer Hayan stayed late in her lab that night, studying the battle data. The more she analyzed the human neural patterns, the more she understood why they were so effective. Every human brain was unique, every decision slightly different. They were living proof that sometimes the best way to fight chaos was with chaos. The Battle of Proxima Centauri marked more than just a military victory. It was the moment the galaxy learned that logic and pattern weren't always the answer. Sometimes, the key to survival was embracing the beautiful unpredictability of the human spirit. The massive holographic display in the Joint Command Center showed thousands of ships moving into position. Operation Daybreak was about to begin, the largest coordinated assault ever attempted against the Void Swarm. Admiral Tadwan and General Davidson stood side by side, watching as human and coalition vessels took their places in the formation. "All ships report ready," Commander Jaya announced from her station. "Human squadrons are in position and awaiting your orders." Engineer Sangmin rushed into the command center, clutching his datapad. "The final weapon modifications are complete," he reported breathlessly. "All ships have been equipped with the new hybrid systems." The past weeks had been a blur of activity as Sangmin worked with human engineers to combine coalition energy weapons with human ballistic principles. The humans had suggested something that seemed absurd at first: using concentrated energy beams to superheat and accelerate physical projectiles. The result was devastating. Weapons that combined the penetrating power of kinetic rounds with the adaptive properties of energy weapons. General Davidson smiled as the Void Swarm responded exactly as predicted, moving to counter the apparent main thrust. "They still think in patterns," he said quietly. "They see our capital ships attacking. They'd move to counter them. They never expect what comes next." The human ships burst from hiding, their engines pushed far beyond normal safety limits. They attacked from multiple angles simultaneously, using the gas giant's gravity to slingshot themselves at impossible speeds. The Void Swarm's perfect formations began to break apart as they tried to adapt to attacks coming from every direction. Sangmin watched the sensor readings as the first hybrid weapons struck home. Coalition energy beams superheated human-designed projectiles to near-plasma state, sending them screaming through space at velocities that defied physics. The Void Swarm's adaptive shields, designed to counter either energy or kinetic attacks, failed against weapons that were both at once. "Look at those formations collapse," Jaya commented with satisfaction. The Void Swarm's usual geometric patterns were dissolving into chaos as human ships darted between their lines, striking and vanishing before the swarm could adapt. The battle expanded across the system as human guerrilla tactics, scaled up to space warfare, created havoc in the enemy ranks. Small, fast ships would strike from unexpected angles, then disappear into debris fields or planetary shadows. Larger vessels used modified coalition jump drives to appear and disappear randomly, never staying in one place long enough for the swarm to counter them. Sangmin's team continued feeding tactical data to both fleets. The hybrid weapons were proving more effective than anyone had hoped. Human gunners, with their instinctive grasp of ballistic trajectories, were hitting targets that coalition targeting computers said were impossible to reach. "They're beginning to retreat," Davidson observed as the Void Swarm started pulling back. "But this time, we're ready for it." He nodded to Admiral Tadwan, who gave the signal for Phase 3. Hidden throughout the system, automated weapons platforms designed by human and coalition engineers activated. The Void Swarm found their retreat routes cut off by fields of unpredictable fire. Every platform used different weapons, different targeting patterns, making it impossible for the swarm to develop effective countermeasures. The battle raged for hours as the combined fleet pressed their advantage. Human ships continued their erratic attacks, while coalition vessels provided covering fire and strategic support. The Void Swarm, for the first time, seemed genuinely confused, unable to predict or counter the chaotic human tactics. In the engineering section, Sangmin and his team worked frantically to keep the hybrid weapons systems running at peak efficiency. The human engineers had introduced concepts that seemed to violate the laws of physics, yet somehow worked. They called it thinking outside the box, a phrase that had become increasingly common in coalition vocabulary. "Another swarm formation breaking up," Jaya reported. "Their adaptation algorithms are failing completely. They can't handle the random attack patterns. The holographic display showed the true scale of their victory, as more and more Void Swarm ships were destroyed or forced to retreat. Operation Daybreak was succeeding beyond their most optimistic predictions. "This is just the beginning," General Davidson said, studying the tactical display. "Now that we know these tactics work, we can expand them, take the fight to their territory." Admiral Tawan nodded in agreement. The Coalition had spent centuries fighting the Void Swarm with precision and logic, never realizing that chaos could be a more effective weapon. It took humans, with their endless capacity for unconventional thinking, to show them a new way to fight. As the battle wound down, Sang-Min received damage reports from across the fleet. Despite pushing their ships and weapons far beyond designed limits, human crews had suffered surprisingly few casualties. They seemed to thrive on pushing boundaries, taking risks that Coalition species would never consider. Operation Daybreak marked more than just another victory. It was proof that the combined strengths of human ingenuity and Coalition technology could overcome any obstacle. As the fleet regrouped and began planning their next offensive, the Void Swarm retreated into deep space, leaving behind wreckage that proved even perfect adaptation had its limits when faced with human unpredictability. The war was far from over, but for the first time, the galaxy dared to believe that victory was not just possible, but inevitable. The Void Swarm had finally met its match in a species that refused to follow the rules of conventional warfare, and the stars themselves seemed brighter with hope. Commander Jia stood before the massive tactical display, watching as human and Coalition ships pushed deeper into Void Swarm territory. Next to her, Colonel Chen studied the enemy movements with intense focus. The combined fleet had been advancing for weeks, taking back system after system that had fallen to the swarm. "Look at their formation." Chen pointed to a cluster of Void Swarm ships attempting to regroup. "They're not even trying to adapt anymore. They're just running." The tactical display showed the truth of his words. Where once the Void Swarm had moved with perfect precision, now their movements were erratic, almost panicked. The very unpredictability they couldn't handle in humans had begun to infect their own behavior. Another victory in the Antares sector. A communications officer called out. "Human Squadron 7 reports total swarm withdrawal. No counterattack attempted." Jaya allowed herself a small smile. "They're running scared," she observed with satisfaction. They've never encountered a species they couldn't predict and adapt to. Now they don't know what to do. The war room hummed with activity as reports continued flowing in from across the front. Human ships, now fully integrated with Coalition technology, were proving unstoppable. They fought in ways that defied conventional tactics, each captain and crew developing their own unique battle strategies. "We've confirmed something interesting," a science officer reported, bringing up new data on the display. "The swarm's adaptation rate is actually decreasing. It's like they're overwhelmed by too many variables." Chen nodded, unsurprised. That's what happens when you face an enemy that refuses to follow patterns. Every human ship fights differently. Every crew has their own ideas. You can't adapt to chaos. The combined fleet's advance continued relentlessly. Human ingenuity paired with Coalition technology had created weapons and tactics that the Void Swarm had no answer for. Hybrid ships moved in ways that shouldn't have been possible, their crews pushing the limits of what their enhanced vessels could do. "Look at this." Jaya pointed to a sector where a single human ship had scattered an entire swarm formation. The captain had somehow used a gas giant's magnetic field to amplify their weapons, creating an effect that even Coalition scientists couldn't explain. They keep coming up with new tricks faster than the swarm can process them. The offensive had taken on a momentum of its own. As word of each victory spread, more Coalition worlds were liberated. The sight of human ships arriving in system after system brought hope to populations that had lived in fear for generations. New tactical data coming in, an analyst reported. The swarm is abandoning their larger formations entirely. They're breaking up into smaller groups, trying to be less predictable themselves. "Too late for that," Chen commented. They're trying to copy our tactics, but they don't understand the principle behind them. You can't program unpredictability. Jaya watched as another swarm fleet scattered before a human attack run. The enemy ships, once so terrifying in their perfect coordination, now seemed almost desperate in their attempts to escape. "We've located their main command node," a sensor officer announced suddenly. The tactical display zoomed in on a massive structure deep in swarm territory. "It's heavily defended, but they're scared," Jaya finished. For the first time in their existence, they're facing an enemy they can't understand or control. The next phase of the offensive was planned right there in the war room. Human captains proposed strategies that seemed impossible on paper, but worked brilliantly in practice. Coalition commanders learned to trust their human counterparts' intuition, even when it contradicted their most advanced tactical simulations. "The beauty of it," Chen explained to a group of coalition officers, "is that even we don't know exactly what we're going to do until we do it. How can the swarm predict our actions when we ourselves don't know what they'll be?" As the day progressed, more reports of victory poured in. The Void Swarm was in full retreat across multiple sectors, abandoning positions they had held for centuries. Their perfect adaptation had become their greatest weakness. They simply couldn't handle an enemy that refused to be predictable. Ji and Chen worked late into the night, coordinating the next phase of attacks. The war room slowly emptied, leaving them alone with the tactical displays and their plans. "Did you ever imagine this?" Jaya asked quietly. "When you first learned about the Void Swarm, did you think victory was possible?" Chen smiled, the kind of confident smile that seemed uniquely human. "We never think about whether something is possible or impossible. We just decide what needs to be done and figure out how to do it." The tactical display continued updating, showing more and more systems being liberated from swarm control. The enemy that had terrified the galaxy for so long was finally meeting its match, not in superior technology or overwhelming force, but in the beautiful unpredictability of the human spirit. As the night cycle began, Jaya looked at the display one last time. The Void Swarm's territory was shrinking rapidly, their perfect formations broken, their adaptation protocols failing. Humanity had been unleashed upon them, and the galaxy would never be the same. The massive coalition flagship, Star's Dawn, emerged from hyperspace at the head of the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Behind it, thousands of ships, both human and coalition, formed a battle line that stretched across the star system. Before them lay the heart of Void Swarm territory and their final target, the Central Control Node. Admiral Tawan stood at his command post, watching the enemy formations materialize. The Void Swarm had gathered every remaining ship for this last stand. Their usually perfect formation showed signs of desperation, clustering around the massive structure that housed their central intelligence. "All ships report ready," Commander Jaya announced. "Human squadrons are in position. Coalition heavy weapons are charged." General Davidson's voice came over the command channel. "Remember, everyone, no complex tactics, no clever strategies, just pure chaos. Hit them from every direction at once. Don't give them time to think." The battle began with a flash of light as thousands of weapons fired simultaneously. Human ships dove into the fray immediately, their modified vessels performing maneuvers that defied physics. Coalition capital ships provided covering fire, their enhanced weapons tearing through space. The Void Swarm fought back desperately, but their responses were sluggish, uncoordinated. Months of facing human unpredictability had degraded their adaptation algorithms. They could no longer predict or counter attacks effectively. "Look at them," Science Officer Hayan commented, watching the sensor readings. "Their neural network is starting to break down. They can't process so many random variables at once." The battle raged across the system. Human ships darted through enemy formations, striking from impossible angles. Coalition vessels followed in their wake, exploiting the chaos to deliver devastating blows. The Void Swarm's defensive lines began to crumble. "Central node is exposed," someone shouted. Through gaps in the enemy formation, they could see the massive structure housing the swarm's controlling intelligence. It pulsed with dark energy, the heart of the entity that had terrorized the galaxy for so long. All ships, Admiral Taiwan commanded, concentrate fire on that structure. Everything you have. Now. The combined fleet responded as one. Human ingenuity and coalition technology merged into an unstoppable force. Hybrid weapons, experimental devices, and conventional arms all fired simultaneously. The space around the central node lit up like a newborn star. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then cracks appeared in the node's surface, spreading like spider webs across its dark hull. The void swarm ships nearest to it began to move erratically, their coordinated patterns dissolving into chaos. The neural network is collapsing, Hayan reported excitedly. The whole swarm is losing cohesion. They watched in awe as the massive structure finally broke apart, its pieces scattering across space. The effect on the void swarm was immediate and dramatic. Without their central intelligence to guide them, the individual ships lost all coordination. Some simply stopped moving. Others flew off in random directions. Admiral Taiwan turned to General Davidson, who had joined him on the bridge for this final battle. "We could never have done this alone," he admitted quietly. "Humanity saved us all." Davidson shook his head modestly. "We all did this together. Your technology, our chaos. The perfect combination." As cleanup operations began, reports started coming in from across the galaxy. Everywhere, void swarm ships were shutting down or falling apart. The enemy that had seemed invincible was finally defeated. In the days that followed, the Coalition Council convened an emergency session. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would be invited to join the coalition as full and equal members. Their unique perspective and indomitable spirit had proven too valuable to ignore. The galaxy changed rapidly after that. Human unpredictability and innovation spread through coalition society, sparking a renaissance of creativity and progress. Coalition technology evolved in new and unexpected ways as human engineers suggested modifications that no one had ever considered before. The Coalition's historical archives would forever mark this as the moment when everything changed, when all hope seemed lost, until humans came. The records would tell of how a primitive species from an overlooked planet had turned the tide in a war that seemed unwinnable. But perhaps more importantly, the galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Logic and pattern weren't always the answer. Sometimes the best solution was to embrace chaos, to think in ways that defied conventional wisdom. It was a lesson that humanity had taught them, and one they would never forget. As Admiral Taiwan looked out at the stars from his flagship's observation deck, he reflected on how close they had come to extinction and how an unlikely alliance had saved them all. The void swarm was gone, but its defeat had given birth to something greater, a new understanding between species, a new way of looking at the universe. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities that no one could predict, and perhaps that was the greatest victory of all.